you, Professor Competent, Professor Crump, and hello, everyone. We are happy to present our paper, Introducing Cannabis Education on a College Campus. Not an easy feat. This paper is being presented by Dr. Crump, Ms. Clement, Dean Joanne Rolle, and myself, Alicia, Reid. The cannabis industry and market are moving at the speed of light. And as you all know, academia typically moves very slowly, but industry and market cannot wait for academia to catch up. So they have explosively taken off. We wanted our campus to keep up, but with an industry like cannabis, it was always going to be an uphill battle. And as you all know, campuses are generally conservative and less progressive to controversial ideas. And when it comes to morality, religion, criminal substances, and culture, that's why we knew it was going to be an uphill battle. Another problem was the fledgling body of literature to support an academic minor. Typically, majors and minors are grounded in a mature body of literature. However, cannabis literature is still in its infancy stage. Yet, there's a huge amount of academic literature on cannabis, especially on medicinal applications. So there remains a ton of gap in the literature that remain for researchers to fill.
And even though that literature is in its infancy stage, we were able to draw from it. We found two particular studies, Black 2020 and lastly in Pollock 2020, and both of them provided suggestions to researchers and scholars that wanted to introduce cannabis on the campus. And to sort of paraphrase their recommendation, one of them was that cannabis needs to be demystified and destigmatized as not solely being a Schedule I narcotic used by criminals and quote unquote bad people. Another one of their recommendations was to reframe, reposition cannabis for what it actually is. So the plant is much more than just something to be smoked. It's actually something that provides many different industry applications as well as medicinal use. Another one of their recommendations was to sort of garner the support of key voices that could help to argue effectively the fact that cannabis education should be included on a campus program. So a little more than 2 years ago, a lot of students and alumni came to the campus and they said, hey, Medgar Evers College, what are y'all doing about cannabis education? And their voices were heard. Shortly after, a small task force was created by about 5 people internal to the campus. And then together, along with a lot of other external voices, next thing you know, cannabis was reframed as an emerging industry that provided tremendous workforce development opportunities for commercialization and medicinal application of the plant. Then next thing was that we needed to gauge the interests of both the market and the industry to find out, is there a demand to put cannabis education on the campus? And we received overwhelming support for the answer was yes. So therefore, we developed a very comprehensive curriculum and program to introduce it. Then the next step was we engaged in funding talks. Can we just go back one slide, please? Next step was we engaged in funding talks with cannabis funders. And then finally, the curriculum was actually developed and submitted for campus approval, which we received. And now we're just waiting for the final university approval. Now, all of the work that was done was not done just by a small group of people on the Cannabis Task Force. Instead, it required a broad coalition, and that coalition included, in addition to the industry partners, it included students, alum, faculty, staff, administrators on the campus. It also included other campuses, as well as community members and community groups, advocacy groups, as well as key government officials and key legislators, and then finally graduate programs. And so all of that was led by the Campus Coalition. Now, one of the problems that we encountered was The informal task force was an informal group, and therefore many of the agreements that needed to be made between some of the external campus people and internally could not be formally signed off by the group. Yet we needed to lay the foundation for those formal agreements to be signed off once our leadership was formally installed later. So nonetheless, we prevailed. Another obstacle that we faced was, this is catch-22. There were two competing conditions. The first condition was companies needed us to launch first in order for them to get what they needed to give us funding. But the second condition, in contrast, was we needed companies to first provide funding in order for us to effectively launch and give them what they needed. Again, nonetheless, we had to continue to prevail.
The cannabis program developed is anchored on 4 particular pillars, as you see here: education, advocacy, research, and entrepreneurship. Education consists of 13 new courses that actually comprise 4 different tracks in cannabis: 3 science tracks, formulation testing, science cultivation, and science commercialization, and a health track. In addition, we also offer scholarships and internships. Now, the research tier will facilitate collaborative faculty, student, and industry research. The entrepreneurship tier will help launch new businesses. The advocacy tier will encompass community outreach, assisting formerly incarcerated, and legacy transitions. And I know everyone here on this panel knows that legacy refers to those that had cannabis businesses operating in the informal and underground and unregistered environment. We needed this program to provide a very profound and meaningful impact on our campus. MEC is currently experiencing declining enrollment and retention, as well as major budget shortfalls. With this in mind, we built a program to help positively reverse these 3 trends. Also, the cannabis program had to positively impact workforce development. Students also wanting to be equipped for the workforce as directed by industry needs, but we wanted to make sure both student skills and industry needs were properly aligned. For social equity metrics, such as many of the economic metrics that plagued the primarily Black and Brown communities, now we wanted to reverse and mitigate many of these metrics, as well as provide much of the social justice gains that people have been constantly screaming about. Now, in terms of what's next, well, we need to gain the approval of our Central University, also known as City University of New York, or CUNY. Many of the expressed intentions in terms of the relationships between industry partners and our campus, we actually need to get those fortified into formally signed memorandums of understanding. We also need to engage in targeted marketing to essential stakeholder groups. And finally, lifting off and executing the program.
So we have identified some very specific targeted learning outcomes and objectives, and we just kind of summarize those into those bullets. And the first one is a number of people trained through this initiative, which includes degree-bearing students as well as other people from the broader community. And then the second one, a number of workshops attended where we're targeting those for people on the campus, faculty, staff, as well as students and community members. And then the third one is a number of new ventures formally launched by participants, including the stakeholder groups that we mentioned. And then finally, we do anticipate presenting a number of cannabis research papers to peer-reviewed academic conferences, both for presentation and publication purposes. And so we close with a few suggestions for future research. So we believe that in addition to the constraints that we've laid out, we believe that research should look at additional constraints that would perhaps prevent cannabis education from being included on a campus. The second one is, what's the best way to introduce cannabis education based on discipline? It may be different in the hard sciences, the social sciences, humanities, and so forth. And so what is the best way per discipline? The third one, when it comes to budget impact or non-financial resources or effort expenditure, how do those things impact the campus brand, particularly in terms of cost versus benefit analysis? We believe that's an important research inquiry. The fourth one is, what's the relation of generation influence? So that's nexters, baby boomers, millennials. Does generation influence play a role in campus propensity to include cannabis education on a college campus? We believe that that's a worthy research inquiry. How do effective marketing strategies differ across different stakeholder groups? Do we need to market differently to students, to some of the firms, to administrators, government officials, and so forth? How do those marketing strategies differ across the groups? And then finally, what are some of the ways to reduce much of the detrimental environmental impacts that are being caused from the explosive cannabis industry growth? So that's a huge area. So those are some of the suggestions that we line up. So at this moment, we'd like to close our presentation. We thank you all for listening. We certainly would love to hear your comments, your suggestions, Q&A, or whatever. So thank you very much.